Kia ora everyone, this is Anderson's Odyssey. I'm Jacob Anderson. My guest today is Ben Kepes. Ben is a tech commentator, ultramarathon runner, and Blake leader. Ben, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Have you been running a lot in lockdown, or what has that changed your kind of plan, or has it given you more time to kind of get exploring? Or
I've been doing, I haven't been doing a lot of missions away, but I've been doing a lot of running. So both my sons ex-Yelfies and obviously Yoni went on the expedition, and so Yoni's a big runner. So we did a couple of backyard 50k runs, which was a bit mindless on a 200-meter circuit, round and round. But I think I've run, other than one day, I've run every day for the past 2 and a bit months. So yeah, I've been doing a heap.
What your ultra marathon running seems to me like there's another type of person when you go past running marathons. Do you notice sort of different personalities or different types of people that get attracted to that kind of long, like seriously long distance running?
Yeah, I don't know. It probably says something about all ultra runners that there's a increasingly or staggeringly high proportion of ultra runners are recovering addicts. I'm not, but anyway, I think it's an interesting thing, and so I really like I never run with music or don't listen to podcasts while I'm running or whatever. And for me, it's life is hectic and crazy and busy, and I just love getting out there and just the rhythm and getting in the zone and just thinking and stuff. So for me, it's I don't meditate, but my running is kind of meditative time for me. And I like the athletic challenge. I like racing. I've got a group of mates that we run together and race together, and lots of banter and competition, and yeah, it's awesome.
But so, ultramarathon's 160 odd Ks, isn't it?
Well, so kind of officially anything over a marathon is an ultramarathon. The generally accepted definition is sort of 50k and up, but kind of the holy grail, and it's there isn't a holy grail because it's whatever people are into, but kind of the holy grail of ultramarathons is the 100 miles, so 160 kilometers, which is it's kind of like the sort of the ultra, I guess.
What interests me about that is obviously there's an element of physical conditioning, and then you must get to a point where it's no longer a physical test, but it's purely psychological, and who's kind of the most resilient or has the strength to kind of just keep pushing the body. What are the sort of things that you guys are going through when you're kind of 10 plus hours into one of these huge runs?
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not a physical thing at all. Obviously you need base fitness to be able to keep going, but beyond that, as you say, beyond 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, it's all mental. And I really enjoy sort of exploring that space. So it sounds weird, and it is weird and bizarre and whatever, but I quite like so these 100-mile races, they take the longest time I've been running is 29 hours, 29, 30 hours. And so you're sort of like 20 odd hours into a race. It's the middle of the night and you've been going literally all day. And you sort of have these, you almost kind of go out of yourself a little bit and sort of observe the way you're feeling physically and mentally. And, it's always really interesting. The night times are hard, and the worst time is sort of that 3, 4, 5 a.m. when it's, you've been running through the night and it's dark and it's cold, and then you see the sunrise, and it's just it's amazing, because I think it's I think it's a bit of an sort of a metaphor for life, that the sun always comes up, and there's a book that an ultra runner said that it doesn't always keep getting worse, or words to that effect, and basically the sun will come up. It'll feel better, you'll get a second wind, you'll finish the race and you'll get to sit down, and you'll have something that you can talk about over a beer, or reminisce with your mates over when you're old, and tell your grandkids about, and all that sort of stuff. It's the great thing about ultra running is you can't be, a pro athlete. You can't make a living from it. But, no one cares. Like it's a bizarre thing. So you do it because it's all about the challenge. And spending time in the bush, spending time with mates. I'm lucky that one of my sons runs as well, and so we run together a bunch. And what's not to like about more time out in the outdoors?
Yeah, one of the interesting things with running and I guess with fitness in general now is we're seeing a lot more of these smart devices and tools we can use to enhance our performance or enhance the way we exercise. Beyond a smart watch or some of these other monitoring devices that people can just wear all of the time, how advanced do you think we might start seeing some of those things, or how much more information can we start to gather that can really help us in some of those performance environments, do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, there's an app that lots of runners and cyclists use called Strava, which everyone tracks their runs and stuff on. And we all use that. But the interesting thing is observing sort of ultramarathoners versus, say triathletes or whatever. And triathletes are very scientific, and every device, every tool, every carbon fiber, this and that, or performance improvement or a special diet or whatever. Ultramarathoners tend, it's not black and white, but they tend to be a lot more relaxed about it. And because at the end of the day, if you're talking about, whether you're talking about equipment or food, after 12 hours, everything tastes crap, and all it is what can you actually stomach. So that ends up being chips and lollies. And everything hurts. So it doesn't matter how advanced your shoes are or your bag is or your walking poles, it all sucks. And so I quite like, I used to be a cyclist, and I used to get into the whole, bike geek stuff and nice wheels and carbon fiber this and all that sort of stuff. I quite like with ultra running that, you wear shorts and a t-shirt and a pair of shoes. The most you can spend on your kit is probably $400, maybe. And then other than that, it's just going out there and getting amongst it. And so, as I say, it's another kind of reflection. I guess life is so complex and there's so much going on. Like I'm involved in a bunch of tech stuff, so I kind of understand, that whole data and measurement and all that sort of stuff. But I really like that with ultra running. Apart from logging my runs on Strava, I don't do any of that. A lot of people do, and there are some really interesting tools. So there's all manner of sensors that you can put on your shoes. There's nutrition tracking devices. I've got a mate who works for Microsoft, and he's right into all of that sort of quantified self stuff. Wears one of those weird rings that senses your sleep in different patterns and whatever. I don't do any of that stuff because it's all just a bit complicated for me.
It's funny you say that, to kind of escape or detach, because everything's happening really quickly, and we are seeing even more advances every day now. It seems like there's a new device or there's a new tool, or even with COVID, people are adopting new technologies or adopting new things that they haven't before. What do you think are some of the opportunities that we have, or some of the new technologies that we're starting to see emerging that perhaps people aren't thinking about yet, or that government perhaps isn't thinking about, where obviously the businesses are kind of at that cutting edge?
Yeah, so I think I think technology is a really interesting thing, and I think that technology is a really useful tool that can be applied to a bunch of different situations, businesses, organizations, leisure, whatever. So I'm a big proponent of doing better business, or doing having better outcomes through technology. That's a good thing. I'm not so keen on the whole technology for technology's sake thing, because I think that's just a road to waste and overconsumption and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I think that if you think about the things I'm involved with, Kepes, for example, we make backpacks and clothing. Like it's pretty old school. There's some really there's some great applications for technology and what we do. So things like having, RFID sensors on every garment, so people can, track their item and look at its provenance or whatever. A bit of robotics and kind of artificial intelligence to kind of increase efficiencies or whatever. So there's definitely aspects there. But as I say, I think those things are tools to make existing things better. I think in terms of, the coronavirus thing, I mean, clearly everyone's been working from home, and so, Zoom is amazing. The fact that we can do this stuff remotely, clearly, it's huge. And if this had happened even 10 years ago, it would have been a very different situation. And in fact, down here in Christchurch, it's 10 years since the earthquakes, and the experience people have had is very different because working from home is much more viable now. But I think the other thing coming from COVID that I'm really keen for government to think about is resilience. And I think that we have for 30 or 40 years gone down this whole sort of neoliberal pathway, which is that, we'll be in part of a global economy, we'll source our products from, the cheapest place in the world, and we'll refine our supply chains. And that's great because it means we can have, great lattes and buy, really cheap electronic goods or whatever. But it means that when the supply chains fall down, we're kind of screwed. And so I think the conversation for the government is, or the society as a whole actually, is how can we use technology and apply it to what we already do to deliver what we need. And so I think the past couple of months I've been thinking a lot about sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at that base layer, the sort of survival needs, food, shelter, clothing, those sorts of things. We do that pretty well in New Zealand, but we've done it as a commodity product. And the only way to make more money out of a commodity product is do more of it, which is why you can't swim in the rivers, when there's actually water in them and they're dry most of the time, and all of those sorts of things. So how do we move away from being a commodity player to doing value add stuff, and therefore make our economy more resilient and our society more resilient, but B, think about outputs, across not just financial but also sort of social and environmental metrics. So I think that's the opportunity coming out of COVID. I think that a little bit disappointed in the budget that it was a little bit light on the aspirational stuff. Kind of hard to do with a 3-year electoral cycle, but I think that's the conversation that we need to have going forward.
Yeah, there's a big question now around, reskilling and these new job opportunities, and obviously there's a whole range of different ideas, and people are kind of doing all sorts of different things to stimulate that. But where do you think there's some key areas that we should be focusing our energy that would really help kind of accelerate or promote some of that kind of thinking?
So I think in two slightly incongruent ways about that stuff. I mean, clearly, STEM, we need to train people to be able to, embrace technology, use it and apply it to our businesses. So that's a big thing. But I also think back to the future. So if I think about, Kepes, we make all of our stuff here in New Zealand, but we make it from imported fabrics because nobody makes fabrics in New Zealand anymore. And to me, that's bizarre. We grow the best wool in the world, and then we send it to China to be made into fabric, which we then, buy finished garments that are also made in China. So what would my vision be? My vision is that you have a look at a region that isn't doing so well economically or socially, Northland or East Cape or whatever. You take some money from the Provincial Growth Fund that was designed to kind of get those economies happening again, and you build a factory to produce fabric in one of those places, and local manufacturers will use that fabric. It's the same with forestry. I mean, every time I fly into Wellington, I grew up in Wellington. I love Wellington. Every time I fly, and I get really depressed because you fly over the port, and there's that wharf just full of logs, and all those logs are being sent to Asia to be turned into timber products that we then import back in as furniture. 30, 40 years ago, we had sawmills all over the country. Every village had a sawmill, and people would make things, you know. So we made our own furniture, we made our stuff. So same deal with timber, you know. East Cape grows a huge amount of timber. You know, last year they had the floods. All of those pine plantations that have been clear felled, all of the slash got washed down and created huge issues in Tokomaru Bay and Tolaga Bay and places like that. How about we plant a more sort of resilient, you know, slower growing species? We selectively harvest. Sure, that costs more, but we take that selectively harvest timber and we process it there on the East Cape, get some factories set up making furniture. All of a sudden, we've got a really high value product, and we don't need to clear fell because we're getting more value, you know, per acre or whatever. So I think so I think it's both things. It's getting technology and doing the advanced stuff, but it's also thinking about what society in New Zealand looked like 40 or 50 years ago when we were much more sort of resilient.
If we think about the primary production part, obviously, you know, forestry, agriculture, but then how we really try and imagine a new New Zealand with 5G and electric airplanes and, you know, charging stations everywhere. And I mean, I don't think range anxiety is a real thing, but for people who don't have electric cars, it seems to still be a real thing. How do we kind of promote that, or why do you think there's this? Is it purely a financial barrier that's restricting us from having these kind of courageous ideas about, you know, having this amazing electric fleet in New Zealand, as well as, you know, in 10 years' time having EV domestic flights up and down the country? Or why do you think, or from conversations you have with people, that we're struggling to get that momentum, or is it purely just the cost?
I think it's a bit of cost. So there is a switching cost, but there's also there was a book written you know, a few years ago called Innovator's Dilemma, and basically, you know, it's a long book, but basically what it says is if you've got a heap of infrastructure and you've got a heap of people's social context or life context revolves around a certain thing, i.e., you know, getting in the car, their individual car that they own, they probably use 1% of the time, filling it at a gas station with petrol or diesel, you know, driving, you know, into town in their own car with one person in it on, you know, big roads that are choke solid. That's their context, and they'll moan about it. Absolutely, they'll say the traffic's terrible, fuel's too expensive, I spend so much money on my car. But moaning about it is very different from switching context to, well, what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to embrace an e-mobility revolution. I'm going to, you know, there's going to be pooled electric vehicles that no one owns, but anyone can rent per kilometre or per hour or whatever. Similarly with, you know, e-scooters and e-bikes or whatever, you know, there'll be electric buses, you know, mass transit options going around the place. I mean, all of that stuff is just hard to get your head around. And so, you know, it's really easy to say the politicians have no vision, but if you're a politician that relies on being voted for to get in, and you're trying to push something that people can't even comprehend, that's a difficult equation. So, you know, I think that what's the solution? The solution is, I think, twofold. One is education. So we need to kind of tell the stories, you know, weave the narratives so people understand what a different future could look like. But also, I think we need to change the system. So the electoral system, we need to move on from a 3-year electoral cycle, have a national agreement around where we're going, and that sets some sort of big picture deliverables or whatever that happen over you know, decades, and then all of a sudden we aren't in this sort of pendulum swinging wildly backwards and forwards that we currently are with the electoral system.
When I think about some of those goals, with the freshwater announcement this week, and then even with predator free, actually, you know, it's fun and good to have this goal for 2050, but what we're currently doing isn't going to achieve the goal. It's helping us and we're holding the line, but if we continue to do what we're doing today until 2050, we would still fail. So there's still a lot of work with these kind of the roadmaps and in between. And that largely it comes from new innovations in technology and perhaps with things that we haven't quite figured out yet, like genetic tools. How do you think we can use technologies and, like what companies like Cacophony Project are doing to solve some of those conservation problems that we have?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, again, it's twofold. So, gene drive is possibly, the answer to the predator problem. You've got a technology problem to overcome to actually make sure that you can do gene drive safely and effectively. But the bigger issue is the perception one. And so, I don't think we should get into a 1080 debate. But if you look at the 1080 debate, that's a perfect example that the best intentions sometimes are misunderstood and are seen as some kind of conspiracy. So to say that it's a technology problem, I think is too easy. And if we look at it through that lens, we run the risk of failure, because what will happen is we'll develop the technology and then nothing will happen because we haven't done the education, we haven't put in place the policy framework, all these sorts of things. So, I think there's, the predator-free one is really interesting because on the one hand, there's some amazing work being done with community trapping groups and, localized initiatives. And that's doing a fantastic job on a local level. That's not going to make, one iota difference to, the national parks, the dock land. So how do we change things there? There has to be a bit of top-down stuff, and there has to be a mature understanding of the greater good. And so, if, for example, gene drive is the answer, and I'm not saying it is, but if that would solve the problem, then we kind of need to accept that no solution is perfect, and we need to choose the lesser of two evils, I guess. And that's a really difficult thing to get across because everyone thinks their particular evil is the worst. So I'm not sure what the answer, but it's a societal challenge and a technological one as well.
When I have conversations with people, we seem to end up back in that same point over and over. That social license piece is arguably more complex and difficult than the science itself, and that's the case in not just predator control, but in COVID as well. We're seeing all of these kind of conspiracies pop up, and even in vaccination is a kind of a crazy one, because even vaccination isn't perfect. One out of, I don't know, just for argument's sake, 1 out of 1 million people might have an adverse effect to a vaccination, and then that can cause a lot of harm. But for, as you say, for the most part, that risk versus opportunity has to be weighed up. And I think how we have those conversations with the broader public about all of these issues is really important. And what I'm finding today is, in the middle of this pandemic, and for the most part, the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about any of these topics. They don't tend to dive very deep into some of the really meaty issues that we need to address as a society. And there's a lot of people wanting to talk about this and have these conversations, but there's not really a big public platform or a big public space where people have access to any of this information. And I don't know what the solution is, because there's a huge appetite for it, but it's really strange, because I cannot see a place at the moment where there's an opportunity for the general public to engage.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think that so clearly media has been massively impacted by the rise of social media and all that sort of stuff, and its train wreck and all those sorts of things. But that aside, I think it's quite easy for us to blame the media for delivering what we as a society demand. And so the fact of the matter is enough people are excited by clickbait, listicles, titillation, what the Kardashians are doing to make it worthwhile the media publishing that stuff. So it's to me, it's kind of the same as the Trump conversation. And clearly Trump's a madman and is insane and is stupid and a misogynist and all that. No one I have any respect for disagrees with that. But to me, that's not the issue. The issue is that however many people voted for him, Trump is a reflection of the society that voted him in. Boris Johnson and Brexit are a reflection of the society that did that. And I think that on the one hand, there was an article an economist in the States published yesterday that Jacinda Ardern is the leader of the free world, basically saying that in terms of vision and humanity and empathy and leadership and all of those, charisma, all of those sorts of things, she is head and shoulders about everyone. And so as as New Zealanders, we can be very, very proud of that, of the fact that we did crush COVID, and we, the mosque killing, she told Donald Trump to just think about Muslims or whatever. So all of that is true, but it's important to not rest on our laurels and to also be mindful that we have issues as well. And I think that it's easy to see that and think that everyone thinks the way we do, but that's not the case. So I think that I guess modern media tends to polarize things. We're all good or we're all bad. Everyone is one end of the spectrum or the other about one particular issue, and people are much more sort of heterogeneous than that, I think.
And that's apparent all over the world, and you're seeing these same trends. But I think what we are seeing now is there is this increased appetite for longer form conversations without the polarization, and actually kind of just working through some of the issues in a rational and mature way, which it seems like there is an appetite for. I think that's probably a good way to wrap up the conversation. Ben, do you have anything else you want to add to that or kind of mention?
No, other than the fact that it was disappointing that the it's not called the Off anymore, but Blake and Spire in April was cancelled. But I'm looking forward to hopefully being there in October and seeing some awesome students, because I think that not just coronavirus, but the mosque shootings and the earthquake and my experience, being a Blake leader and around those Blake initiatives has shown is that, my generation, your generation aren't going to solve these problems. It's the young people of today who are going to fix our screw ups. So I'm looking forward to getting amongst it with some of those young people and seeing what they come up with.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end the conversation. Also, thanks so much today, Ben. It's been great to have a chat with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Cheers.